Good morning, whoever happens to be out there. How are you all doing? Good, I hope. Usual thing. Questions and comments I'll get to at the end. And you know the shtick of the show. What we do is we take a look at the morning news and react to it at pretty much the same time that I do. So like most YouTube commentators, I'm uninformed going into this, but I'm not going to pretend to be otherwise. That's the shtick. Right. Tim Pool, but I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about, and I actually am left wing. So, privyet, good morning, Huva Paiva. Let's get into it. What has been going on? Coronavirus still in the news, obviously. You know, plagues tend to stick around and remain towards the top of people's concerns, shall we say. The concern now, even though we're in the middle of summer, is that when we get to winter, things are going to be bad because we're going to have the seasonal flu and coronavirus going on at the same time, and that's the big concern. It will put a whole load of extra stress on the health system, that there might be misdiagnoses and all kinds of other problems. Coronavirus doesn't seem that affected by heat or cold, so that's probably not going to change that much. But people will be spending more time indoors. Lockdowns are likely to have been relaxed by then, so we could see another spike. But we're at the point where it seems that in most countries, other than the US, it seems to be dipping down regardless. Probably because more people have had it than we knew, and because people are taking sensible precautions on top of earlier lockdowns. So most people are wearing their masks. Most people are socially distancing. Plenty of people are being careful. So it's a bit too early to tell, I think, but this is the story now. It will up the amount of deaths. It'll just be less clear as to what's down to coronavirus, what's down to flu, what's down to pneumonia, and so on, without testing. Well, there is going to be testing, but there's more opportunity for confusion. Let's put it that way. But I think it's a bit early to be worrying about that in the news cycle. It's not too early to be worrying about it in medical terms, governmental terms. But as far as the news cycle goes, I think it's a bit early to be panicking about that. Mind you, I'm getting less and less trustful of the casualty reports and stuff that we're seeing, and the infection rates and so on that we're seeing, because it seems to be in people's interest to minimise them rather than prioritise people's health and decent information. I'm sure there'll be an inquiry in 50 years or so that tells us all kinds of interesting things. A lot of vaccines are going into trials. It's not particularly clear whether this is a disease that can be effectively vaccinated for, because antibodies leave your system pretty quickly, probably due to this being a new and novel virus. So our bodies and our immune systems haven't really cottoned on to how to deal with it properly, or whether to have the antibodies stick around necessarily. But with all this testing going on, and with anti-vaxxers being such a thing at the moment, talk about first world privilege, there's worry that they're going to make the vaccine trials a headache, in part because skeptics may be, well, they're not skeptics, they're credulous. Vaccine pseudo-skeptics, hyper-skeptics might be signing up for these various trials, specifically in order to sabotage them, because they think Bill Gates is evil or something. Who really knows? Who can really understand what they're talking about, what they're saying? But the concern is that not only is there going to perhaps be a lack of uptick, but they could be entering the trials to try and sabotage them for some reason, because they think it's evil or wrong, or is going to be used to chip us, or some other nefarious scheme that makes sense to them but not to anybody else. So yeah, that's a problem. Plus all the heightened bullshit around vaccinations may make it more difficult to properly vaccinate people against the regular flu, because there's a lot of bullshit going around, and there's a lot of people who are afraid or upset or panicking in one way or another, and so that may turn people off from getting the other vaccines that they need due to the heightened paranoia around vaccine trials for COVID and so on. There's a story here on the BBC about this, about some of the problems they're running into. This is people refusing the antibody tests. In Bradford, they recruited 12,500 pregnant women into a study between 2007 and 2010 to monitor the health of their children and give them vaccinations. They've started to offer some of them antibody testing around COVID, and a lot of these women have been bringing up ideas like, you're trying to microchip us, or this is a plot, this is a scheme, this is a plandemic, which is this terrible, terrible pseudo-documentary that's been going around. So that's obviously a problem, and it's a problem that's going to be an issue around vaccine trials. Lots of people are believing the conspiracy theories they see online, saying that all of this is a lie, or there's not really an epidemic. People believing that things will be hidden in the vaccines. There's an aspect of anti-vaccination that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and that is there's a lot of anti-vaccination around in Africa and other second and third world nations. Some of that's paranoia, some of that's distrust of the West. Some of it is because, much like religious evangelists often go to these nations to try and convince people of their God, a lot of anti-vax people have been going to these nations, and island nations as well. There was a big case with measles in Samoa, if I'm remembering correctly. A lot of anti-vaxxers really pushed against the idea of vaccines in Samoa. I think it was Samoa. And there was a huge measles outbreak because of the relatively low uptake of the vaccinations. In Africa, there's concern, and in black nationalism, often there's also concern that vaccines are being used to sterilize people and so on. Not entirely without reason for being paranoid, but it's not to this extent or this basis, and not in the modern day. You know, it's a big and increasing concern, and not only in this country. I mean, India is being ravaged by COVID, right? And the Indian government, fairly early on in the epidemic, in the pandemic, they were suggesting homeopathic remedies, which will do nothing. Oh, right. Well, there's some poop. There's a third rail, so let's just reach out and touch it. A young lad in Camden in the UK, which isn't a rundown area anymore, but kind of still carries a bit of a reputation for one reason or another. There was a young lad playing with a toy gun there, and the Met Police turned up to arrest him because they had reports of a black male with a gun. Guns aren't that common over here, even amongst the criminal element. You can get them, but they tend to be old or reactivated, unreliable in a number of ways. So when there is a gun report, the police here react, some might say, disproportionately. But if you're getting reports of someone with a gun, you're going to respond, right? And I don't necessarily feel like the racial element really has much bearing here, but it's the context. So this young lad, it is a gun that looks like a real gun, but it's a BB gun. Probably shouldn't have had it. I know if you've got a license for that, mate, but still, realistic looking firearms have been essentially banned for a very long time. He was arrested by 10 armed officers. So you can kind of understand why armed police would turn up. And I don't think that would be particularly any different, whatever colour the kid was. I remember a friend of mine had a knock from the police for supposedly firing his airgun pistol out the window. So, you know, they turn up for anyone. Armed police to this extent, some of that is a response to the public demanding crackdowns and so on, but obviously in this climate, in this context, the police turning up mob-handed to arrest a kid for playing with a toy gun, however realistic it looks, it's going to feed into that narrative that we're aware of. But I guess you have to weigh and measure it. Was it because he was black? No, it's because he was waving around a gun, albeit a toy gun. Should they have come in mob-handed in the way that they did? I think we'd want them to if there were reports of people with guns, especially given the random sort of spree-killing terrorist attacks we've had. So I think this is really a non-story. It's lucky that it ended up non-lethal, but I think the British police are much more trained and have much more emphasis on de-escalation and a peaceful end to these kind of conflicts than, say, American police do, who are routinely armed and constantly and consistently have to worry about other people being armed. And in the UK, this was specialist officers sent to deal with this, not regular beat cops. So I think there's a difference and some lessons to be learned there. Mind you, US SWAT seems particularly trigger happy as well. So we've had a story over the last week about anti-Semitic posts by some calling him a rapper, some calling him a grime artist. Neither's in my wheelhouse particularly. But he made a series of anti-Semitic posts and has made all kinds of other anti-Semitic comments and so on in the past and in the present. But the reaction to this was rather sluggish because he's black, and for some reason there's some extent of a pass being given to anti-Semitism within the black community, if such a thing can be said to exist, and that's on both sides of the Atlantic. There have been various interviews and podcasts, and some attention is being drawn to this and the anti-Semitism, unfortunately, painful to admit, that exists on the left, particularly here in the UK. It's all tricky and it's nuanced, which means it's a discussion that's manifestly unsuited for the current day and age and the current political context. Look, Israel are dicks, right? There is no real getting away from that. Palestine doesn't really necessarily deserve the treatment it's been getting. There are injustices and so on there, and you would think if any people in the world knew better, it would be the Jewish people, and therefore you would think it would be Israel. You would think, but that doesn't actually appear to be the case at all. And so a lot of what is actually concern about what goes on in Israel is misidentified, misdirected, misunderstood as anti-Semitism, which I don't think it is. But that also provides cover and gives a pass to a lot of genuinely virulent anti-Semitism. And when you're part of movements that claim to be anti-racist, such as BLM and so on, but many of your spokesmen or members or people who are prominent in or around your movement are themselves virulently racist, something which we can recognize when they're anti-Semitic, but not necessarily when they're anti-white. Yeah, it's not a great look. So why does this anti-Semitism exist on the left, and why does it exist within these supposedly anti-racist movements? On the left, it's a little bit easier to point to, and I think it's because, in very, very simple terms, is that the stereotypes of the evil capitalist greedy pig, the fat cat, they're very, very similar to racist caricatures of the Jewish people. And there are a lot of prominent, wealthy Jewish people who can be conflated with the idea of bankers or corporate heads or, fat cats, rich people, the undeservedly wealthy. Plus, you have all the issues in and around Palestine. And the left tends to be a liberationist, anti-hierarchical, anti-apartheid sort of group. And what goes on in Israel looks very much like that. So that's where it comes from and where it gets cover. In the black community, there's a strong correlation between the black community and the left wing of politics. So some of it comes from there. But there are also insane and nonsensical religious and other ideas, conspiracy theories present in the black community, coming largely from the Nation of Islam and the Black Hebrew Israelites. We was Kangs is how it gets referred to, kind of to take the piss, largely coming from the right wing. But they should have a lot in common because they're both horribly racist. But these ideas kind of take hold there, that and they feed on that oppression narrative, and they say that the Black Hebrew Israelites in particular claim that black people are the real Jews, essentially. There's a parallel conspiracy theory on the right about supposed Khazars, which I only ever found out about because I was accused of being one. And the claim there is that white or white-passing Jews aren't real Jews. They're a sort of engineered fake Jewry that disguises the inferior non-Western origins of the Jews. So you find a similar attitude on both sides, albeit perhaps for different reasons. But to bring this all back, this rapper / grime artist, Wiley, said a bunch of horrendous shit. It took, relatively speaking, ages to deal with him. Some of that will be down to his celebrity. Some of it will just be down to the fact that he's black and is saying these things. But it shows, it demonstrates that there is a kind of two-tier or more system on social media where, like, you can be pounced upon straight away for using the word cunt once, for example, almost immediately. But if you've got any kind of status, or if you belong to some kind of protected class, you seem to get treated differently. So now, ideally, he would be punished, as he has now been, and steps would be taken to go against any racism against anybody, so that we're at least consistent. But unfortunately, the people talking this up and pushing on this are people like Priti Patel, the UK government's Home Secretary, very conservative, for all that she's a racial minority herself. And so reflexively, people are going to push back against that. And that's going to be, in particular, people who might actually be able to do anything about it socially. So even this becomes very tribal. And there's, even with all that, something is being done here, but very little, if anything, is ever being done about equally virulent, equally nasty anti-white racism. You know, the term racism has even been redefined to the point where they say you can't be racist to white people. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. Especially when they're saying you can be racist to Jews, but not to white people. And that sounds racist coming out of my mouth, you know, the idea that you should protect white people from racism. But anyone can experience racism from anyone. And if we're going to say that racism is bad, we need to be consistent about it. And if we're going to censor racism from our social media, which I don't think necessarily we should unless it's direct calls for violence and so on, then we need to be consistent about it. And we're not. And unfortunately for the Jewish people, they are the example that shows the hypocrisy and all the problems around this. Sticking with the kind of racist theme, I suppose, Amazon, Google, and Wish have taken steps to remove neo-Nazi products. So that's things like books, Klan merchandise, things with Nazi insignia and so on them. Clearly there's a market for a lot of this stuff. When it comes to the Nazi stuff, there are innocent reasons why you might want to purchase it. Reenactments, costuming, fetish, you know, all kinds of reasons. And this is just... we've become so critically entangled with these things, Amazon, Google, and Wish, that removing stuff from these platforms essentially censors them entirely, globally, virtually anyway. Is this a good thing? Okay, so a few Klansmen can't get their merchandise, can't make a little bit of money. Wish is just the Chinese will make anything and they don't care. They're completely insensitive. Should it be, though? You know, this is where these difficult questions about the rights to free expression, your commercial rights to set up a business and make money, intersects with these problems and these places where speech is not protected. Social media is the big one we all think about, but it does spread to other things as well. Okay, Nazis is an edge case. Okay, I think many people will go sort of not sure when it comes to that. You know, whether we should or shouldn't ban it. I think people will vacillate, and most people will most normal people who don't think about this stuff constantly will say that, yeah, it's okay to censor all of this stuff. I'm not so sure, but let's take a less contentious, less obvious example. Amazon has recently begun banning a lot of manga and a lot of light novels, which are sort of Japanese short novels that are often tie-ins to manga, or often marketed using the same kind of imagery and so on, but they're actual books that you sit down and read. Some similar somehow, somewhat, to young adult novels, but really just short novels in a paperback format. Roughly analogous to the kind of 70s and 80s small paperbacks you used to get, which is a format that I like. But they've begun censoring those where they contain adult content or other things. There's a constantly ongoing wrangling in the sort of anime manga community about depictions of childlike bodies or small bodies, things like that. I'm not even talking about explicitly Lolita or Shota stuff. There's an ongoing rumbling clash over that. And Amazon has come down on the side of the censors, and not all of their decisions make any sense when it comes to that censorship. So, looking at that, it's a bit less obvious, right? It's not neo-Nazi stuff. But Amazon stopping selling a lot of these products is going to massively impact the companies that produce and translate and relay out and so on, all of this stuff to bring it to the West. And because Amazon is such a dominant force, if it's removed from Amazon, that's a big problem. So you might cheer on Amazon, Google, and Wish removing neo-Nazi and other contentious products. I think Amazon removed a whole bunch of anime figurines as well recently. You might cheer on when it comes to Nazis, but when it comes to this other stuff, it becomes more questionable. And it lays bare just how dependent and centralized, especially during the epidemic, how centralized we've been on this handful of companies. And it's not just the social media companies that dominate the public square, it's Amazon and a handful of others that dominate online shopping. So when they ban something, when they control something, when they remove something, it has a massive impact, more than you might think. Hi Ben, I'll get to comments and questions and stuff at the end and give a little itinerary of what I'm up to, I suppose. Sticking with censorship, QAnon is a whole bunch of supposed whistleblowing, but for the right wing. It's kind of like Mirror Universe WikiLeaks in a lot of ways, and a lot of it seems to be bullshit. In fact, I'm unaware of anything accurate or genuine having come out of it. But it has a lot of true believers, and it's being censored. The specifics aren't hugely important, but a whole bunch of QAnon-related accounts have been banned from Twitter. TikTok has blocked a number of hashtags that are used by QAnon. Other social media companies have moved forward on this as well. So it's being squished and silenced and removed. What effect do you think that is going to have upon the people who buy into this conspiracy theory? Do you think government and tech company suppression is going to make them think, oh, well, no, I guess there's nothing to this after all? Or do you think it's going to cause them to double down, become more extreme, set up their own parallel places, or go to other places where they're not going to be challenged, where they're not going to be forced to explain themselves, where they're not going to be debunked to the same extent? Yeah, I think we all know how this is going to go. So a lot of this censorship doesn't actually seem to be concerned with addressing the problem. It seems to be concerned with satisfying the demands that people are making that the stuff be censored. So it's not about solving the problem, or debunking the QAnon conspiracies, or doing what's best to genuinely suppress these conspiracy theories. Rather, it's being done to please another part of the company's audience or the government. It's not a practical way to address the problem. It's not an effective way to address the problem. It's likely to lead to possibly less people engaged with it, but even more conspiracy-minded, even more extremist. And so the threat that comes from these kind of groups, these kind of conspiracy theories, increases as you apply pressure to it, unfortunately. In more positive news, the new NASA Mars rover, provided it lands okay, here's hoping, called Perseverance, is going to be looking for life again. Hopefully it will succeed. I think that's the one with the drone on it, which I talked about before. So how are they going to find life with this thing? We're pretty much certain at this point that about 3.5 billion years ago there was water on the surface of Mars. We can see where it carved through the landscape. We can see the effects. We've confirmed it through the geology. The planet had a thicker atmosphere. And where there's water, we think you can have life start. And over a long enough time scale, with enough mix of chemistry and so on, it should be inevitable in one form or another. Now, we've been looking for life on Mars since the 70s, when the Viking missions did it and gave some confusing results. If I remember correctly, those confusing results were down to peroxide in the soil. Since then, we've been looking for an ever-widening array of markers. Outgassing, telltale signs in the atmosphere, signs of metabolism. We've drilled down and we found permafrost. We found water on Mars, albeit in the form of ice. There was a contentious potential microfossil that turned out probably not to be one. And so on. But we found various other signs that there may be life, or that there once was life. Perseverance is doing a whole bunch of other tests in a similar way. And we'll be able to drill down. I think there's this flying drone that will be able to check out other places. Perseverance will be able to drill into rocks in a way that previous rovers have, but to a better extent, extracting cores about the size of a piece of chalk. So they'll be able to get it deeper into the rock to look for signs there where they may be best preserved. What we really need to find is deposited rocks, sedimentary rocks. And it should be able to drill down further. It's going to go to where a river channel was that runs into a crater, and so there should be multiple opportunities there to look for something. So here's hoping. If we do find any signs of life, it's likely to be very primitive. There's a very early form of life which is still fossilized here called stromatolites, which are rock formations laid down by bacteria over many, many thousands of years. And we still have examples of those, some in Australia, I think. Is it going to find anything? We don't know. It won't tell us anything definitive either way. But these rovers are really telling us a great deal and sort of narrowing down the scope. And our understanding of the history of life on this planet and the development of life on this planet, and just how hardy and persevering a lot of the life on this planet is giving us ever more insights on where to look, how to look, and so on. The UK government has laid out plans to tackle obesity. Probably the wrong time to do it, because everyone's in lockdown and comfort eating at the moment. But they're going to try and target health and obesity. Some of this is pointless nanny stating. So the whole buy one get one free deal on unhealthy food will be banned. I'm sure companies will find a way around that, and that may well cause a negative food security impact for the poor, which we have to consider. And junk food is one of those few treats you can afford when you're poor. Trust me, I was unemployed for 18 months once, and yeah, when you can afford it, you want a little treat just to make you happy for 5 minutes while you eat a Twinkie or whatever. But it is an increasing problem here in the UK, not as much as in the US. Scotland's even worse. They want to try and improve labelling, which I can go along with. They've already controlled some advertising of junk food to kids, going on with that. They want calories to be labelled on menus in restaurants and so on. I can be on board with that, just because it makes it more convenient as someone who's tried to lose weight a few times. But this just seems pointless finickying and weird for a Conservative government to be this interventionist. Of course, we don't know how long this has been in progress, but none of it really helps in any meaningful way, I don't think, and it's likely to have a disproportionate impact on the food security and mental health of the poor and the precariat and the insecure. So I understand the sentiment. I think it's a good one, but too much stick and not enough carrot, I think. There are other ways you could tackle things, like making places more cycle friendly, more after school clubs, youth clubs, subsidizing people who offer health classes and so on. There's other ways you could do this more effectively, I think, than nannying people. And this from a Conservative government that has previously bitched out Labour governments for being nanny states. Here's an interesting legal change and the future coming as a result of coronavirus. As we've seen, a lot of people are working from home perfectly well and even doing more work, higher productivity, working from home and saving money on their commutes and having less environmental impact due to working from home. This has been a massive positive of the pandemic, not available to everybody, obviously. And we hope a lot of this technological change and flexibility on the part of employers will continue after the pandemic is officially over. But one big difference has been made in that the law has been changed to allow wills to be witnessed by video link. Now, if that sets a precedent and isn't just rolled back as soon as the pandemic is over, if that sets a precedent and we can have more and more witnessing and so on online, tempered by some concern over fraud and fake video links and so on, this does open up a whole lot of legal possibilities and depositions of evidence that could be extremely far-reaching. Up until now, I think there's had to be special exceptions made, but if we allow this, and if this gets a foot in the door, then it opens up all kinds of possibilities for providing witness testimony and evidence and so on, and to witness documents and contracts and legal things in a way that makes conducting your business online a hell of a lot easier. So hopefully this will go further. This is specifically to do with wills at the moment. And for wills to be binding, currently you have to be 18 or over, have made it voluntarily, be of sound mind, make it in writing, sign it in the presence of 2 witnesses, both over 18, have it signed by your 2 witnesses in your presence, and you cannot leave your witness or their married partners anything in that will. So the witnesses part is what has stymied people during the whole pandemic issue, because you haven't been able to spend time around people, particularly strangers, in order to get anything signed. And also, a lot of people have been dying, and so this has caused all kinds of problems. So allowing video witnessing and electronic signing is great. I hope that sets a precedent for other things, because as a small business owner and someone out in the boonies, getting things properly, effectively, bindingly signed and sealed and so on has been an issue in the past. So, good news, I think. I talk about social mobility a lot when I talk about financial and political issues, primarily here in the UK and in the US. The US has this big idea that it is a country where anyone can succeed, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, very anti-social investment. And as a result, despite that narrative of being that kind of country where anyone can make it, anyone can start up and accomplish anything, it's pretty far from the truth. I mean, the US is better than a lot of countries, but when we look at first world countries, the countries with the highest social mobility tend to be those with the highest levels of social investment. Sweden, Denmark, Finland, all the usual Scandinavian democracies and mixed economies, the highly socialist ones that we normally look at. Okay, so why is that? It's because of that social investment, particularly in education. When you can get decent education, when you can get higher education without bankrupting yourself for years, that provides opportunity to everyone. A brilliant person born into a poor family in the US is extremely unlikely to be able to go to college, whereas a very, very bright person in a poor family in, say, Finland is going to get a first-class education and is more likely to be able to succeed if they have the chops to succeed. And that's why largely social mobility is so much stronger in those countries that don't have this cowboy, rugged individualism, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mythology that the US has, and to a lesser extent the UK has. And another part of this is down to disposable income. We talk about privilege in society a lot. Financial privilege is something we don't speak about enough, and it's kind of borderline because you're not given any additional extra rights or anything for being rich. You can just exploit the system that does exist to a larger degree if you happen to be rich. I mean, technically, anyone can up sticks from one place, move to another, and take a job there. But that's a lot easier, a lot more available, a lot more viable if you're already wealthy, right? And everyone's entitled to representation in court, and it's not really a privilege. You don't get given special rights or anything in court by being rich, but you can hire better lawyers, so the end result is that rich people do better in the legal system, right? But with reference to social mobility, the ability to move to where work is, to where jobs are, that's a huge factor. And you largely have to be already wealthy or already secure and able to do it. And so that increases the capability for people who are already well off, while it restricts the ability for people who are poorer. And this has been identified as a big issue when it comes to social mobility here in the UK. Warehouse prices are bonkers. If you can move to London, your career is much more likely to take off. But London is hella expensive, especially when you consider all the moving fees and so on as well. It's kind of like how people go to New York or LA in the US to seek their fortune, and it often doesn't end up going that well. If you can afford to do it with some kind of security here in the UK, you're more likely to have your career take off and to do well, because there's more opportunities. But there's a cost associated with that many people simply can't afford, so they never really get anywhere. Right, well, that's the news for today. I know I've missed last week, and I missed another week a little while ago. Hopefully I'll get back onto doing this, but it never draws a huge audience, so I might just go back to doing normal videos and save this channel for game streaming. I don't know, I quite enjoy doing this, and it's relatively low effort, but there you go. What am I up to this week? Let's see. I've got some more video work come in, which is interesting. I really enjoy doing video work, but I tend to have to shut up about it, unfortunately, and it's frequently very challenging. And I don't have a lot of confidence in myself as a videographer yet, but hopefully that's changing. I'm getting paid for it, so it's all good. A Dragon Warriors game will be on this channel tomorrow. We've got a new player who hopefully will be able to make it both days, but as people come out of lockdown, time is restricted. So we've got some more Dragon Warriors sessions to do, and I need to start thinking about what game I'm going to run after Dragon Warriors. I might take a break for a few weeks and then come back strong if I can bring some people together. What else is going on? Tabletopless. Run games for that, usually starting around 8 PM, but often later because we keep having technical issues. 8 PM UK time. That's going pretty well. I'm being paid to GM, which is nice, and I'm producing a lot of material for the game there. It's not for everybody, you know, the combination of porn and D&D, but it's a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun running it, definitely. Whitechester, it has to be lower priority than my immediately paying work, but it's continuing. My Grimdark rules are essentially done. I hope to have them out this week, but don't bet on it. Possibly not until next week. I've got some more monster conversions and I need to do a full thorough edit, and I need to source some more art for it. But those will be the rules that will be intended to power Whitechester, but Whitechester will also be open and available for standard 5e D&D, and when I crowdfund it, I will also be looking for enough funding to go through and produce stats for everything for OSR games and so on as well. So I hope to make Whitechester a sort of triple threat. I've decided to do a companion volume to Grimdark, also preceding Whitechester, of a bestiary, where I'm going to revisit a lot of the monsters. So going through converting the monsters, there's not a huge amount of difference between standard 5e and Grimdark monsters. You really just have to change the hit points by and large, and tone down some of the powers, particularly things like breath weapons and so on. Otherwise you'd be TPKing with a single attack every game, pretty much. So you have to watch out for that. But I want to revisit a lot of those monsters and crank them up to 11, which means, unfortunately, because I want to give it more of a horror bent, I probably won't be able to sell it on drive-thru. And we'll have to sell it only directly through my own site, but we'll see. What else is going on? I think that's all the stuff I can really talk about. There's other stuff going on the sly which I can't talk about necessarily, even when it comes out, unfortunately. I have been weirdly busy throughout this entire pandemic, and I don't know why. I guess a lot of people are off work and looking to get stuff to do with their hobbies and so on, maybe. But it's welcome. It's nice to have a lot of work. I've had a couple of mental health crises that make it hard to keep going, and I have all these commitments, so it's been a bit stressful. Anyway, I had better crack on, make a list of all the stuff I need to do. Comments, just Ben saying good morning, talking about the Mars thing and the obesity thing. Maybe do a schedule announcement for the game so people can see roughly when it's going to start. Yeah, probably. That's probably a good idea. But I'm rather disorganized. So, all right, well, I'll think about that. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great day. See you soon. Zang.